Hello and welcome to TCL Media. I am the Conservative Liberal. Today we will be discussing what is the biggest threat to trans rights. We will also be discussing about people who identify as trans just to exploit trans rights for their own gain. We are also going to be talking about self-identification and who can identify as trans and who should be allowed to identify as trans. If you are expecting me to convey some woke extreme leftist diatribe, that is not going to happen now or ever. We are only going to have honest discussions on this channel. I began my transition in 2011. I had my final lower surgery in 2016. I am now 10 years post-op. So by now you're probably wondering, who am I? You can find out more about me online. Just Google transgender caving instructor. Behind me, you see my Union Jack. That is my pride flag. They are my colours. I am British through and through. But not only that, this is the flag that gave me my rights. This is the flag that lets me exist. And this is the flag that looks after me. That's why this is my pride flag. I am proud to be British. So, who should be allowed to identify as trans? Only trans people who have medically transitioned and have all the medical paperwork to prove that they have fully physically transitioned and that they are going to fully physically transition. So let's take a deep dive on transgender identity. Cross-dressers and drag queens are not trans. Neither are non-binary people. They are not trans either. To be trans, you need to be born as one gender. For me, I was born male. I identify as female. I had surgery, which is more congruent with who I am. But that does not change the physical fact that I am anatomically male. Chromosomically, I am male. And why does this matter? If I was put into hospital now, I say if I was unconscious and I was submitted to hospital, then the thing is I need them medical people to know exactly my whole physical makeup, because I don't want them going in doing exploratory surgeries looking for body parts that I just don't have. We're not born with womb or nothing like that. You understand? We are anatomically male, right? Majoritively. And say if it's a woman who transitions into a man, right? Then they are still anatomically female. Let's not scare the fact. There are people out there that identify as trans purely for the fact to exploit the rights and protections that trans people are given. We as trans people should not stand for this, and we should stand totally against it. When you get people who transition and they have no goals for lower surgery at all. Sorry, but these are not trans people. These are just full-time cross-dressers or drag queens. There are people out in the world that feign the transgender identity just so they can gain access to single-sex spaces. This is dangerous, and acting like it is not happening is asinine. So when you see celebrities coming out saying, oh, my child has a new trans identity never seen before, that is an outright lie. There is only one transgender identity, and that is you are born in one gender, identify and assign with the opposite gender. That is what it is to be trans. So it is important that we discuss single-sex spaces and their protections. As trans people, we should not be trying to enter single-sex spaces. We should be looking and pushing for trans-only spaces. It is not segregation. It's just being respectful. When you have women who have been victimized through male pattern violence, the thing is allowing trans people in those spaces can actually be harmful, and saying it is not harmful is also asinine. It's important that these protected spaces are kept protected. These should also make toilets for trans people, support centres, especially for trans people. That's what they should do, instead of forcing us into single-sex spaces where necessarily we don't belong. The biggest threat to trans rights is self-identification. Your self-declaration for the purposes of gender change without lived experience or without any robust check is very, very dangerous. It not only erodes the protections in single-sex spaces, but it also erodes trans rights. It creates incentives and opportunities for bad actors, and that includes sex offenders. Self-identification blurs the line between the sex-based boundary by allowing anyone who, whether they've had hormones, whether they are trans, to enter single-sex spaces just by simply declaring verbally that they have a female identity. That should not be allowed, and transgender protections should not apply to these people. This is not me saying that all trans people are dangerous. This is me just acknowledging the fact that male sex offenders will exploit trans rights and the trans identity to their own end, and we should not let this happen. So it's about time that we have a discussion about trans-only spaces. There are documented cases where a convicted sex offender who was male decided to identify as trans just to get into a female prison. Once he was in that female prison, he then proceeded to assault and rape in other inmates while he was there. This is wrong. This is not a trans person. This is not somebody who is trans. This is a criminal, a sex offender who uses the trans identity just to exploit the rights and the protections that we as trans people are given. Nobody should be allowed into single-sex spaces just because they decided to identify as trans when they are not trans. And this is why we need trans-only spaces, because this will also, it will help the protections for trans people. It will help trans people who need support, and it will also protect women's spaces. If we had trans-only spaces, sex offenders would no longer be able to go, I'm trans, and just self-identify to gain access to female-only spaces. In this way, by creating trans-only spaces, then these people who decide to identify as trans, instead of being put in a women's prison or a women's protection centre for domestic violence, then the thing is that they'll be put into a centre for trans people, and guess what? You're not going to have access to them single-sex spaces. And this is why we need to call for stronger barriers for identifying as transgender and actually being transgender. Also, when we talk about single-sex spaces, we also need to talk about trans people in sport. Trans people should have their own sporting categories: trans female and trans male. For myself, I am trans female. I was born male. I should be competing against another trans female who was also born male, and the same goes for trans males as well who were born female. That's how it should be. We should have our own sport categories. There should be no exclusion from the sport. Trans-only sporting categories is something that needs to happen. Excluding trans people from sports is very, very, very unsportsmanlike. The thing is, right, is I also agree that trans females like myself should not be competing against natal biological females, because to say that that I would not be advantaged would be an outright dishonest lie, because I am probably stronger than most in sporting categories like climbing or swimming. Self-identification undermines legitimate rights. Self-identification without gatekeeping incentivizes bad actors and sex offenders to try and take advantage of protections that trans people like myself are given. Even a small number of people exploiting trans protections so that they can enter single-sex spaces. This damages trans rights for genuine trans people like myself who are harmless to the public. Keeping the trans identity to only people who have been medically diagnosed with gender dysphoria, it acts like a filter. Self-identification does not. The bottom line is self-identification creates loopholes that sex offenders, small but very real subset of people, actually do use and exploit. So if there's anything you can take away from this video today, I would like that to be that the biggest threat to trans rights is self-identification. I am the Conservative Liberal. Please leave a like and subscribe for more future content. Also, let's discuss in the comments. If you agree with me, write a comment. If you disagree with me, write a comment. Let's have a discussion.